Hi everybody, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Kira and I am your host here at Vinoculture, where I teach wine classes, host private events and tastings, and do educational videos for you who cannot attend the classes in real life. So today we're going to be talking about blind tasting. And blind tasting is one of my favorite things to talk about because often it's so scary, right? It's very mystifying, intimidating, and very often pretentious thing to do and to talk about. And so when it comes to someone who is not in the business, it's not a professional, it's not a sommelier, who just loves wine, often they're scared off by the idea of blind tasting. And I'm here to say, don't be scared off. Blind tasting is not a magic trick. It is a skill that anyone can learn, and I encourage you to practice this on a regular basis. So I'm going to break down the basics of blind tasting. This is definitely just an outline, a guideline. Definitely come to a class or talk to a sommelier or read some books or watch some other videos about blind tasting, but most of all, it just comes down to practice, and especially practicing with other people. That's how we learn to become better tasters, is tasting with other people. So, first thing of blind tasting is no, we are not blindfolded, although if I took my glasses off, I'd be just about blind, but I'm gonna leave them on because you're not blindfolded this. The only thing is, wine is in a glass, and I don't know what is in the glass. So that's what blind tasting is. Tasting a wine, white, red, bubbles, doesn't matter, and figuring out what grape it is, where it might come from, and you can be as general as a region of the world like Europe or South America, or as specific as a single vineyard within a tiny little region, within a bigger region, within a country. So the further up you go in your practicing of blind tasting, the more specific you'll be able to get, and the more theory you study as well. But for the most part, if you're just getting into blind tasting, don't worry about the intense, narrowed specifications of where it comes from. Just think in general concepts of, is it European, or is it Old World, or is it New World? And then you try and think about how old the wine is. So is it really young and vibrant? So produced within the last 1 to 3 years? Does it have a little bit of age on it, maybe 5 to 7? Or does it show a little bit more age-worthy qualities, 7 to 10? Or maybe it shows even more than that, more than 10. So not trying to nail down necessarily the specific vintage as of now. That comes a little bit later on, but just trying to nail down a general characteristic of the wine. Does it show age or not? So we're gonna start by looking at the wine. Oftentimes, someone pours us a glass, we go immediately to drinking, or we might go immediately to smelling, but we skip the first part, which is really important when it comes to blind tasting, and that is to look at the wine. So if you take your glass, you can hold it up to the light, try to have a light source behind you. Give it a good swirl. It's easiest to swirl holding on the bottom of the stem. You can swirl it with just a flick of the wrist then. And you're looking, as the light shines through the wine, how easily is the light reflected? Or is it really opaque? Or is it more transparent? Is it clear? This wine is pretty cloudy, and there is some sediment on the glass. So it looks like little tiny bits of sand or little tiny bubbles falling down. That's sediment in the wine that comes from just the wine not being filtered. So that tells me already something, not necessarily about the grape, but the winemaking practices, which could be important coming up. The next thing we're looking for, after we give it a good swirl and let the wine settle, we're looking for the legs, or the teardrops of the extra wine that fall down the glass. So it's easiest to find those teardrops or legs if you look at the part of the glass that's further away from you. If I try and look here, it's harder for my eyes to concentrate on this curve of the glass. So looking here is really helpful to find those legs. And legs aren't just pretty to look at, although they're pretty to look at, let's be honest. Legs tell us something, and they tell us the alcohol percentage of the wine. So alcohol, as it increases in the wine, makes the legs more defined, more thick, more easy to see, and slower to form and fall down the glass. So if a wine is medium, 13%, it's gonna fall down quicker than this. This is definitely falling down slower, and they're pretty thick legs and pretty defined. So I'm gonna guess that this is 13.5 or 14% minimum alcohol content. Alcohol generally ranges from about 11% to 15% in the wine world. and that's the general category. Obviously, you can go lower or higher with some wines. So, alcohol percentage is clued, not necessarily perfectly given by the legs, and that's really important to look at. Next thing you want to look at is color. So most people continue to look at the wine holding up the glass like this to find out the color. It's not really how we find out color, because I'm just picking up color from all around the room. So if you have a white piece of paper, you're going to hold the wine glass on its side like this, not enough to spill the wine, we don't want to lose any wine, but on its side about an inch above the paper. If you're at a restaurant, you can use a tablecloth, a napkin, or a plate. And you're going to hold it about an inch above and look straight down. And what you're looking for is, again, how transparent it is or how opaque it is, and the actual hue or color pigment of the wine. So this wine is very deeply purple, and it has a ruby red rim. So very, very opaque, not a whole lot shining of light able to shine through. I definitely can't read through it. And it's between purple and some ruby hints as well. So that might tell us what grape it is once we get down to the final conclusion of the wine. Next part is smelling, and this is by far probably the most important thing when blind tasting wines. So to give the wine a good swirl is necessary to start before you smell. As the wine coats the inside of the glass, especially if it's crystal like this, the wine is kind of absorbed by the porosity of the crystal glass, and it releases esters. Esters are simply the chemical component that tells us what we are smelling, whether it's fresh cut flowers outside, freshly paved asphalt, smelly gym shoes, or wine in our glass. It's esters that tells our nose what we are smelling. Those esters are only released as the wine breathes or opens up. And what does that mean? It just means oxygen is being introduced into the wine, and it's allowing some of the alcohol to evaporate slightly. That's what releases the esters into the air and into our nose. So after we swirl the wine, this wine has definitely been swirled quite a bit, so those esters are all up in there. Swirl the wine, stick your nose all the way in. If you're lucky like me to have a big nose, it's quite easy, but we're not dainty here, so stick your nose all the way in. First thing you want to look for or smell for is how intense the aromatic is. Is it really jumping out of the glass, or is it shy and reserved? This wine is definitely jumping out of the glass for me. It's pretty intense. And finally, you get to pick what you are smelling. So is there fruit in there? If so, what are the fruits that you're smelling? And what about non-fruits? Non-fruits can be herbs, can be flowers, can be earth or mineral components like dirt, soil, rocks. You can have woodsy components like mushrooms and leaves and wet soil. You can have barnyard components like manure and rotting hay. So many different things. Don't be scared by smelling something and thinking, oh, that's too weird to say out loud. Trust your first impressions. If you smell it, there's a reason that your brain is going there. So trust your first impressions and never think that something's too weird to say out loud when you're smelling it in a wine. It's usually the thing I'm looking for when I'm guiding blind tasting classes. So to me, this wine has a lot of red cherries. There's some red flowers in there, but they're kind of dried and old, and lots and lots and lots and lots of green pepper, like green bell pepper. So after you nail down the fruit, herbs, and flowers that you smell, you want to think about the condition of those items. So the condition of the fruit, of the cherries, kind of more dried and stewed fruit on this one. And the green pepper that's so dramatic on this one is almost like charred and smoked on the grill, like you're cooking kebabs in the summertime. So the condition tells us a lot more than just the fruit itself. So don't forget that step. Don't just say the fruit that you're smelling. Make sure you nail down and specify the condition of that fruit. Is it ripe? Is it underripe? Is it stewed or dried or jammy, raisinated? All of those things are conditions of fruit and are really important when you're trying to figure out the wine. Next, we're going to taste the wine, which is obviously a super fun part of this. And what I recommend is people always start with just an initial first impressions taste. So just a small sip. You're going to let it slide down the middle of your tongue, and you're going to swallow it quickly. Don't let it warm up. Don't let it coat the mouth, and that gives you just an initial first impression of the wine. Okay. Next sip, you're gonna take a much larger sip in your mouth than you might think is normal for wine drinking. Again, we're not trying to be dainty here, we're trying to be professional tasters. So take a larger sip, you're gonna swish it all around in your mouth like mouthwash. You want it to coat every part of your gums, your cheeks, your tongue, the roof of your mouth, under your tongue, everything, because every part of our mouth gives us more clues about what is in the wine. So if you only let the wine hit your tongue is gonna be the only thing experiencing the wine, and you're gonna miss a lot of that. So I will demonstrate this. I forgot to say that you should slurp the wine a little bit too. It's helpful to aerate the wine while it's in your mouth, so you're able to smell the wine while it's in your mouth. So to do that, lean forward just slightly and slurp in some air. And that leaning forward helps you not aspirate while you do that. And just small amounts. Don't try and do really suck in a whole lot of air, because you will choke wine all over, which I have done before, for sure. So doing that allows me to experience the wine in such a bigger proportion. I am getting the texture and the structure of the wine, which is what we're looking for when we're tasting the wine. So you're looking for acidity. How much is your mouth watering? How much is your salivary glands puckering up and making you water? This wine has pretty high acid. I'm puckering up a whole lot, and my mouth is watering a whole lot. It's making it hard to talk right now. You're also looking, especially in red wine, for tannins. So acid is the mouth watering effect in the back of your mouth. Tannins are the mouth drying effect in the front of your mouth. So how much after you swirl the wine around does it feel like cotton balls are stuck up in your mouth? You have that mouth drying sensation. So tannins come from the grape skins, the seeds of the grape, stem, leaf, all that stuff, and the oak that the wine was aged in, if it was aged in oak. So it's really fun to me when wine has high acid and high tannins, because your mouth is equally drying out in the front of your mouth as it is watering in the back of your mouth. This wine is not that. This has pretty low tannins, not getting a whole lot of drying sensation, just slight, but mostly it's higher acid for sure. Next, you're gonna feel the alcohol content. So how far after you swallow the wine do you feel it kind of burn when it goes down? If you feel it just at the top of your throat, lower alcohol content. Obviously, think about taking a shot of tequila. You take that shot of tequila, you feel that down to your toes. So that indicates higher alcohol content. So wine will kind of hit, if it's higher alcohol content, it'll kind of hit you down at your clavicles. That's about 15%. If you feel it lower than that, then it might be a fortified wine, or it might be a California Zinfandel. I feel this one kind of 2/3 of the way down, so again, I'm thinking it's about 13.5, 14% alcohol, and that confirms what the legs were telling us too about the alcohol percentage. Sometimes wines are confusing in terms of whether or not they are sweet. So sweet, opposite of dry. Dry, opposite of the sweet. We're not talking about the drying sensation of tannins. We're talking about dry wines not being sweet. So sometimes wines are really fruity or really smooth or really fruit forward, jammy, floral, and they can almost make you think that the wine is sweet, like it has sugar in it, even when it's dry. So to figure out whether or not the wine is sweet, it's sometimes helpful to stick just the tip of your tongue into the wine, and that concentrates the wine where most of your sweetness receptors are on your tongue. Obviously, they're spread throughout your entire tongue, but a lot of them are right on the tip of your tongue. So super awkward to do in a restaurant if no one else is doing it with you, but just show them this video, they'll understand what they're doing. So, doing that, this wine is bone dry. Yes, it's really fruit forward and it's got a lot of going, some jammier, more stewed fruit. This wine has 0 sugar in it whatsoever. It is bone dry. There is no perception of sweetness on my tongue at all from that one. So those are some of the things that we analyze when we talk about the structure of the wine. You can also talk about balance, if one thing is more dominant than another, and if it overpowers some of the other flavors. You can talk about complexity, like how many layers of flavors are there in the wine. And you can talk about whether or not the palate confirms the nose. So do you taste the same things that you smell? I do. I taste all of those green peppers and the cherry notes. It's a lot more woodsy than I smelled. I didn't smell all of this woodsy notes. I smelled all these dried fruits, and I get a lot more like woodsy cedar chest kind of characteristics to the wine. But definitely predominant is that red fruit and that charred green bell pepper. So based on all of this, we're gonna take those notes and then think about the grape that it might be. So I have a little cheat sheet of different grapes, what they generally look like in terms of color, what they generally smell like in terms of fruit and non-fruit and condition of the fruit, and then what the structures are generally like in terms of old world or new world versions of that. So higher alcohol content, higher acid, tannins, sweetness level, all of those things. So look for a cheat sheet like that. You can Google them online. And then basically you want to take all your tasting notes and then compare them to the grape notes themselves. So don't just do the notes and then think, oh, this is what it is. You have to look at what you wrote down, because the wine was talking to you the whole time you were smelling and tasting and looking at the wine, and it was trying to tell you something. So oftentimes I find that, especially the further up you go in this, the more you have confirmation bias. You just think the whole time, oh yeah, that's Cabernet Sauvignon. That's Cabernet Sauvignon. So at the end, you don't even look at your notes. You just guess Cabernet Sauvignon. But this wine is a Cabernet Franc, and I would have known that. I would have been able to more accurately guess that had I looked at all my notes and noticed that I kept saying green bell pepper, red fruit, lower tannins, a little bit higher acid. Overall, the body on my tongue was a little bit lighter bodied, not as full bodied as Cabernet Sauvignon would be. So they can be oftentimes confused, but this wine is definitely Cabernet Franc. And while I knew that in advance because I poured it, if I had looked at my tasting notes, I would have been able to guess that. And you can too. That's the goal of this. That's the point of this video, is to make sure that you know that you are able to do this. So I'm going to post in the comments the cheat sheet for some of the basic grape varieties, both red and white. And I'm going to post as well some of the things that we talked about in terms of the tests that we do for acid and tannin, body, complexity, all of those things, so that you can have the tools and resources to start practicing this at home. I know this was a long video, but thanks for tuning in for the whole bit. I hope to see you at a class or event soon, and if I don't, because you are far away across the world, then I hope to meet you one day. And until then, drink some wine, practice wine, share wine with others, and we'll all learn together. Thanks so much.